Have you ever looked out at the ocean at night and realized something out there was looking back? Rachel, a travel blogger known for her sun-drenched dispatches from exotic locales, had come to Folly Beach seeking solitude, a quiet corner of the world where the rhythm of the waves could lull her into a creative trance. The vintage beach house she'd rented, perched precariously close to the shifting sands, promised just that, a creaking, salt-laced sanctuary. On her very first night, as the last sliver of tangerine sun dipped below the horizon, she settled onto the weathered deck, notebook in hand, ready to embrace the quietude. That's when the first flicker caught her eye, a faint, ethereal glow just beyond the breakwater, like a firefly trapped beneath the dark, churning surface. At first, she dismissed it, attributing the anomaly to a distant fishing boat, perhaps a stray buoy light, or even the playful reflection of the moon on a particularly clear patch of water. The ocean, after all, was a canvas of constant motion and deceptive light. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath of the briny air, and tried to refocus on the blank page before her. Yet, the image persisted behind her eyelids, a tiny, insistent spark in the vast, inky expanse. When she opened them again, the light was still there, a little brighter now, a little more defined, a pulsating heartbeat in the otherwise uniform darkness of the sea. The second night, the lights were undeniable. Not one, but several, moving with an eerie, almost deliberate grace just beyond the reach of the shore. They weren't the steady, predictable beams of a boat, nor the erratic flash of a lighthouse. These were organic, shimmering with an inner luminescence, shifting in color from a pale, ghostly blue to a deep, unsettling green. Rachel found herself abandoning her writing, drawn instead to the large, salt-stained window overlooking the waves, a silent sentinel to the unfolding mystery. A shiver, unrelated to the cool evening breeze, traced its way down her spine. "It's probably just phosphorescence," she muttered to herself, her voice thin against the roar of the surf, trying to rationalize the inexplicable. Or maybe some deep sea bioluminescence pushed closer by the tide. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they rang hollow. The lights seemed too focused, too purposeful. They didn't drift, they moved. They didn't merely glow. They watched. The feeling of being observed, subtle at first, began to intensify. A prickling sensation on the back of her neck that made her pull the curtains just a little tighter before bed. Each subsequent night, the lights grew bolder, inching closer with an unnerving patience. They formed patterns now, subtle configurations that seemed to shift and rearrange, like a silent underwater conversation. Rachel found herself staying up later and later, a mug of lukewarm tea forgotten beside her, her gaze fixed on the watery spectacle. She tried to capture them on her camera, but the lens seemed to blur the spectral glow, rendering it into mere smudges of light. It was as if they existed just outside the realm of tangible reality, a secret whispered only to those who dared to listen. One restless evening, unable to shake the growing unease, she sent a quick text to her best friend Sarah back in Charleston. "Hey, weird question. Ever heard of strange lights off Folly Beach at night? Like underwater, but really bright?" Sarah's reply was immediate and breezy. "Low, probably just some drunk fisherman or a rave on a boat ratch. Get some sleep." The dismissive tone did little to soothe Rachel. In fact, it only amplified her isolation, reinforcing the chilling thought that she was the only one witnessing this unsettling phenomenon. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, but distinct enough to make her pause, her pen hovering above the page. They seemed to emanate from beneath the very floorboards of the old house, a low, guttural murmur that was swallowed by the crashing waves, only to resurface moments later. It sounded like a language, ancient and alien, carried on the damp sea air. She'd press her ear to the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs, but the moment she focused, the sound would recede, leaving only the familiar creaks and groans of the aging structure. The lights were now alarmingly close, almost within casting distance from the shore. They pulsed with a malevolent rhythm, their glow illuminating the undersides of the waves, turning them into monstrous, translucent claws reaching for the sand. The feeling of being targeted was no longer a vague apprehension. It was a cold, hard certainty. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, her every movement observed by unseen eyes beneath the water. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell, its thin walls offering little protection. The final, undeniable sign of intrusion came with the seaweed. Not the usual flotsam washed ashore, but long, slick strands of dark, unfamiliar kelp, draped across her deck chairs, tangled around the railing posts. She hadn't gone swimming, hadn't even dipped her toes in the water. Yet it was there, a slimy, organic calling card left just outside her door. A chilling reminder that whatever was in the water was no longer content to stay there. It had breached the boundary, leaving its mark. The ocean, once a source of comfort and inspiration, had transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer a vast, indifferent expanse. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was reaching. For her, the lights beneath the water were not just a natural wonder or a local legend. They were the eyes of something ancient, something hungry, and it had found its new home. And Rachel, alone in the old beach house, knew with a terrifying certainty that she was now part of its story. They told her not to open the door upstairs, but curiosity, as the old adage goes, kills more than cats. For Miguel and Andrea Vasquez, fresh from their whirlwind wedding, the beach rental in Pacifica seemed like an absolute dream. A charming, slightly weathered house perched on the cliffs, offering breathtaking ocean views. The price, frankly, was too good to be true, and the only peculiar stipulation in the lease agreement was a single, handwritten line: "Please do not unlock the upstairs room." They had chuckled about it over champagne, dismissing it as an eccentric landlord's quirk, a quaint relic of a bygone era, perhaps a storage space for old furniture. The room, a solid oak door at the end of a dimly lit hallway on the second floor, remained a silent, unassuming presence. At first, it was a running joke, a playful dare between them. "Think there's buried treasure in there?" Miguel would tease, rattling the doorknob playfully. Andrea would roll her eyes, or maybe just a mountain of dusty taxidermy. "Let's just enjoy the view, shall we?" The Pacifica air was crisp, the sunset spectacular, and the ocean's roar provided a constant, soothing backdrop to their honeymoon bliss. They were too enamored with their new life, too caught up in the romance of the moment, to truly consider the weight of the owner's strange request. But then came the storm. A tempest rolled in from the Pacific, lashing rain against the windows, and making the old house groan and creak like a ship at sea. The power flickered, plunging them into a momentary inky darkness before the generator kicked in with a guttural roar. It was amidst this chaos, the wind howling its mournful song, that they first heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a child weeping. It was faint, muffled by the storm's fury, but distinct enough to cut through the din. A fragile, heart-wrenching sound that seemed to emanate directly from behind the forbidden store. Andrea froze, her hand gripping Miguel's arm. Her eyes, wide and searching, met his in the flickering lamplight. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. Miguel, ever the pragmatist, tried to brush it off. "Just the wind, babe, or the old pipes. This house has more creaks than a pirate ship." He pulled her closer, trying to reassure her, but even he couldn't shake the chill that had settled in the room. The crying, though brief, had been too clear, too human, to be easily dismissed as mere house noises. It lingered in the air, a ghostly echo. The crying didn't return that night, but the unease had settled in like a damp fog. And by night 3, something else began. Miguel, a heavy sleeper, started waking with a jolt, a sharp, stinging sensation across his back. At first, he blamed a loose spring in the mattress, then a stray thread from the sheets. But the marks were undeniable, deep, angry red scratches, thin and precise, as if drawn by something with long, sharp nails. They appeared randomly, sometimes one, sometimes several, always on his back, always when he woke from a deep sleep, and always accompanied by a lingering sense of dread. The scratches, coupled with the memory of the crying, finally pushed them to action. "We have to call him, Miguel," Andrea insisted, her voice tight with a fear she could no longer hide. "Something's not right here." With a reluctant sigh, Miguel dialed the owner's number. His voice, when it answered, was devoid of warmth, a flat, almost mechanical tone. Miguel explained the sounds, the scratches, the growing unease. There was a long, chilling pause on the other end before the owner's voice, now laced with an icy warning, cut through the silence. "That room hasn't been opened in 30 years. Don't be the first." The warning, rather than deterring them, only intensified the macabre fascination. The locked room became an obsession, a silent, malevolent presence that dominated their thoughts. One night, Andrea found herself standing before the door, a silver spoon clutched in her hand, meticulously trying to pry open the lock. Miguel, woken by the faint scraping sound, found her there, her eyes glazed over, her movements slow and deliberate, like a marionette, when he gently led her back to bed. She had no recollection of it, her face etched with a confusion that mirrored his own terror. "I don't remember," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't remember doing that." The house, once a haven, now felt like a cage, its walls closing in, its secrets pressing down on them. Every creak was a whisper, every shadow a lurking presence. The ocean's roar, once comforting, now sounded like a hungry growl. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations revolving around the forbidden room, the unseen entity within. "What if it's not just a room, Miguel?" Andrea had asked one afternoon, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it's a way in or a way out?" The question hung heavy in the air, a chilling premonition. On the 7th night, the tension was unbearable, a suffocating blanket of dread. They lay in bed, listening to the relentless pounding of the waves, the wind rattling the windows. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible click, followed by a slow, agonizing creak, the sound came from the hallway. The locked door upstairs, the one they had been warned never to open, slowly, silently, swung inward. A faint, phosphorescent glow spilled from the opening, illuminating the dark hall, and the faint, sweet sound of a lullaby, impossibly clear, began to drift down the stairs. Andrea, her eyes wide and vacant, rose from the bed like a sleepwalker, drawn by an invisible force. She moved towards the open doorway, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor, her gaze fixed on the glowing aperture. "Andrea, no!" Miguel cried, leaping up, but it was too late. She stepped across the threshold, swallowed by the eerie light and the haunting melody. He lunged after her, his hand outstretched, But as he reached the doorway, a sudden powerful gust of wind, or something far more sinister, slammed the door shut with a deafening thud, plunging the hallway back into darkness, leaving only the faint fading echo of a child's lullaby. You can bury things in the sand, but they never stay buried forever. For Becca, Jordan, and Ty, 3 college friends escaping the suffocating grind of autumn midterms, the Outer Banks in October seemed like the perfect antidote. The old beach. Shack they'd found online was a steal, promising windswept solitude and endless stretches of deserted coastline. They envisioned bonfires, late-night talks, and a much-needed respite from campus life. But as they drove down the desolate, sand-swept road, the biting cold air and the eerie silence of the off-season town began to prickle at their initial excitement. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant, as if the very air held its breath. Shack itself was charming in a rustic, dilapidated way, leaning slightly into the prevailing winds, its paint peeling like sunburned skin. Inside, it smelled of salt, damp wood, and something else, something ancient and faintly metallic, like old blood. On the small, wobbly coffee table, they found a guest book, its pages yellowed and brittle. Becca, ever the curious one, flipped it open. Most entries were mundane, but scattered throughout, in various shaky hands, were chilling warnings. Don't sleep near the dunes. The sand watches. It breathes beneath the house. They laughed it off, of course, attributing it to quirky previous renters with an overactive imagination. Seriously, the sand watches? Jordan scoffed, his voice a little too loud in the quiet room. What are we going to get buried alive by? A rogue sandcastle? Ty, always the skeptic, chimed in. Probably just some local legend to keep tourists away from their secret fishing spots. Becca, however, felt a prickle of unease. The warnings, though seemingly absurd, were too consistent, too insistent. She closed the book, a shiver tracing its way down her spine. Despite the warmth of the crackling fire they'd managed to get going in the old stone fireplace, the wind outside seemed to keen a mournful tune, carrying with it the scent of the vast, empty ocean. That night, the first unsettling incident occurred. Ty, who usually slept like a log, woke up with a gasp, bolt upright in his bed. He felt a strange grittiness, a pervasive chill. When he switched on his bedside lamp, he found himself covered in fine, pale sand. It clung to his hair, dusted his sheets, and even coated the inside of his mouth. He stumbled to the bathroom, spitting out the dry grains, his mind racing. All the doors and windows had been securely locked before they went to bed. There was no logical explanation for the sand. "Guys," he mumbled the next morning, his voice hoarse, "you are not going to believe this, but I woke up buried in sand. Jordan, initially amused, turned pale when he recounted his own experience. "That's nothing," he said, rubbing his temples. "I had this dream. I was being dragged into the dunes by these pale, long arms. And it felt so real, like I couldn't breathe, like the sand was filling my lungs." He shuddered, running a hand through his hair. "I woke up sweating, and I swear I could still feel the grit on my skin." Becca, remembering the guest book, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The playful atmosphere of their getaway was rapidly dissolving, replaced by a creeping dread. The house itself seemed to shift and settle around them, its old timbers groaning with a new, ominous cadence. The wind outside no longer sounded like a mere breeze. It sounded like whispers, like something sifting through the grains just beyond the windows. Becca, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, decided to explore. Underneath the main living area, accessed by a small creaking hatch, she found a damp, dark crawl space. And there, half buried in the loose, damp sand, were dozens of rusted lanterns, their glass panes clouded with age. And then she saw it, a small, crudely made doll, its button eyes staring blankly, its mouth stitched with what looked horrifyingly like human teeth. She scrambled out, her heart pounding, the image of the doll seared into her mind. There's a doll down there," she stammered, showing them a photo she'd bravely snapped. "With teeth, real teeth, I think." Ty and Jordan exchanged a look, their skepticism finally crumbling. The air in the shack grew heavy with unspoken fear. The warnings in the guest book, the inexplicable sand, Jordan's nightmare, and now the doll, it was all too much to dismiss. "We need to get out of here," Jordan said, his voice barely a whisper. "This isn't just an old house, it's something else." But leaving proved to be more complicated than they imagined. The next few nights, a new, terrifying phenomenon began. They all started sleepwalking, drawn by an irresistible, subconscious pull towards the beach. One morning, Becca found Ty lying in the surf, his clothes soaked, his eyes wide and unfocused, muttering, "The Sandman brings the tide, he brings the tide." His skin was clammy, his lips blue, and he seemed to be in a trance, repeating the chilling phrase over and over until they managed to shake him awake. The fear was no longer a distant threat. It was tangible, breathing down their necks. Then, Jordan disappeared. One night, after they had all barricaded their bedroom doors with chairs and luggage, they woke to find his bed empty, the back door ajar. Becca, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, saw them. Fresh footprints leading from the back door, across the damp sand and into the vast, unforgiving dunes. But there were no footprints coming back, only the wind erasing the last traces of his passage. In a desperate, trembling hand, Becca called the local sheriff. His voice, when he finally answered, was gruff, weary, and laced with a chilling finality. That house, he said, should have stayed empty. It wakes up when people return. Becca, alone and terrified, tried to leave. She packed a bag, her hands shaking, and stumbled towards the car. But as she reached the edge of the property, a sudden unseen force yanked her backward. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was swallowed by the wind. She felt herself being dragged across the sand, her nails tearing at the gritty earth. Her eyes wide with terror as the dunes loomed closer, darker and more menacing than ever before. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was the faint, eerie glow of the moon reflecting off the countless grains of sand, each one a silent witness to her vanishing.